What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we are back with Absolute Wonder Woman. And God, this comic is amazing. So, where we left off with the first issue from a little while ago, and we're actually going to cover 2 and 3 at the time that we're making this video, that Wonder Woman basically came across some harbingers. And we still don't know a whole lot about her. All we really know is that instead of being raised by the Amazons, she was sent away, seemingly taken by Zeus, and dropped into hell and raised by Circe in hell instead. Now, there is a really cool caveat when it comes to Wonder Woman and these new powers that she has, which is that she's deeply embedded in magic. And we'll talk more about that as time goes on, because really Kelly Thompson is drawing on the old William Moulton Marston run of Wonder Woman from the Golden Age, where there was a lot of magic involved. But again, we'll cross that bridge when we get to it here in a second. Instead, these harbingers that she faces off against, she initially, as we saw at the end of the last video, kind of told them who she was, right? Like, I am Diana of the Amazons, this world is under my protection. She never explicitly calls herself Wonder Woman, which is actually something that's seemingly going to change in this video going forward. But the harbingers reject her initial statement that they have been brought there for a purpose and that they are going to fulfill that purpose. And so Wonder Woman, of course, takes it to them, pretty much as you would expect. But this is where a lot of the magic starts to come into play. And it's one of the cool elements here. Over the years in DC, what they've done is they have kind of restructured Wonder Woman to kind of highlight more of the popular elements of her character over the years in DC's history, which basically meant that I wouldn't go so far as to say she was distilled down into like a female Superman analog, but most people loved the idea that she was like just this incredibly strong and powerful Amazonian woman that kind of had her own story and history and whatnot. So a lot of these magical elements of her character fell to the wayside. It's not to say they didn't appear from time to time, but you never really saw it like this, where the magical elements of her were on full display for the world to see. Instead, most of the magic that Wonder Woman had was invoked by like the various artifacts that she had. That she had her bracelet, she had her lasso of truth, different things along those lines, right? But to see her actually practicing magic and using magic against various forces, it is a great throwback to the golden age of Wonder Woman comics, way back in like the 30s and 40s. And so what you end up doing here is when she finally overcomes these harbingers, it's with her throwing the lasso around them. But again, while we're not really given the true nature of the lasso, just kind of inferring what it is happening here contextually, it's not one that draws truth, that forces a person to speak honestly. Instead, it seems more like a lasso of power that's designed to force one to either obey or to force one to recognize her strength, right? It's really more of a offensive weapon than a defensive weapon. And so that's why when she overpowers this Harbinger Prime, the leader of these Harbinger beasts, she tells them, right, like, leave here and I will let you live. Do not come back. Whatever beast sent you here, give them the same message. If they come here, they will come across me, right? Diana, protector of this world, and they will die. And that leads to the Harbingers retreating. And at that point, Wonder Woman turns around and she's met by the arrival of Steve Trevor. Now, most of you guys know, just either from the Wonder Woman film itself or just kind of your casual knowledge of Wonder Woman's history in DC Comics, or because you know a lot about her character, that Steve and Diana have a very close history. And in every iteration of DC's reboots, right, the New 52, Crisis on Infinite Earths, and everything in between, that whenever it is that Wonder Woman arrives on Earth for the very first time after leaving Themyscira or wherever it is that she comes from in that rebooted landscape, Steve Trevor is the first human she meets. And more often than not, Steve Trevor meets her in her land and ultimately, by some manner, brings her to Earth. Now, what's going to be cool here is that she's not going to arrive on Earth the way that you expect. Instead, Steve Trevor arrives on the Wild Isle, right down in hell. And much like what you would expect from the Wonder Woman mythos, right? Of course, she appears there and, he's like, Steve Trevor's just like, tell them I'm sorry and just kind of babbling to himself to a degree. And the Hydra tries to take him, right? Now, we'll see the Hydra here in a little while, and it's by no standards of measurement like a huge significant thing, but it is kind of cool to see. But Wonder Woman essentially uses a kind of magical spell to seemingly heal him of his injuries. And then when the Hydra tries to snatch him, she just runs in, grabs him, and then takes off and brings him back to her mother. Now, one of the big things that's cool here, right? This is one of the things that I love about this. It's in stark contrast to what you would normally see in the Wonder Woman mythos. Because when a man appears on the island of the Amazons, he's not supposed to be there. It is an island where men are not supposed to be at all. One, because the Amazons don't want them there, and two, because by the decree of the gods, there should be no men there. And so the result is that the Amazons usually just like kill men on sight, right? After or either that or the men die from, death by snoo snoo, which isn't a bad way to go. But when it comes to these, when it comes to Wonder Woman bringing him here, instead of the kind of rejection you would see on Themyscira with Hippolyta, the queen of the Amazons, and so on, her mother doesn't really reject Steve, but doesn't really welcome Steve. If anything, she's more just kind of curious about what's going on. Because Diana, being very young and being very headstrong and really just kind of impulsive to a degree, is like, I found him by the shore, right? Like bring the Cerebus fur. It's the warmest. We have to like bring this guy back, right? We have to like take care of him because Wonder Woman sees that while his life is his own, he's a thinking, sentient being, he can make his own decisions, that she saved him. Therefore, it's her responsibility to make sure that he survives. And so ultimately, Steve Trevor just kind of wakes up. And when that happens, Diana just kind of explains what's going on, right? He's kind of like, okay, so like, I thought I heard you speak Greek. And she's like, yeah. And he's like, but we're not in Greece. And she's like, I wish we were. And so the exchange is really cool because he says, so where are we? And she says, we're in my home. I live here with my mother, Circe. And he says, right, but like, where is that? And she's like, this is going to be hard. You're in the underworld. And that's where it's like, wait, I'm in hell? And she's like, essentially, yeah. And he's like, I'm dead? So it's really just kind of like hilarious the way this little bit is written here. But she's like, not exactly, right? And that's one of the important distinctions to understand when it comes to, even with DC Comics, the idea of other dimensions and things like that. Just because you arrive in an other dimensional place, which would be normally depicted within human mythology as like heaven or hell or something like that, does not necessarily mean that you are dead, right? It's just kind of one of the big assumptions that humanity makes, really due more to their lack of understanding of higher dimensional planes than anything else. And so when you have someone like Steve Trevor from humanity who shows up in hell, he immediately assumes that he's dead. Why else would you be there? And so ultimately, Diana's like, I'll give you a minute to just kind of acclimate. But there really is this kind of amazing moment between kind of Circe to a degree and Wonder Woman herself, because, her mom's just kind of like, give him time, right? I mean, it is a huge shock to find out that you're in the underworld and basically hell, right? And just kind of operating on this assumption that you're dead, but not really knowing if it's true or not, because Steve Trevor doesn't remember what happened, and Wonder Woman and them, of course, weren't there when it happened, so no one knows for sure how it was that he got here. And that's why she's like, why do you think he's here? And the response of her mother is, I mean, I don't really know. And so that's where Diana's like, I mean, do you think it's some kind of a trap or something like that? Or maybe a gift? Like, who knows? Neither of them know. Now, that's when her mother figures out that even if Wonder Woman is not, romantically smitten by Steve Trevor, she's curious about Steve Trevor. And so, of course, that leads to Steve showing up and kind of offering an apology for him sort of, acting out to a degree in the way that he did. He wasn't belligerent in any meaningful way, right? But common courtesy is, I am in your house, therefore I will treat you and your house with respect, right? That kind of thing. And so it's just kind of like, cool, right? Pleasure to meet you. But notice, there's no real rejection here on behalf of Circe when it comes to Steve. And that is really one of the huge differences between how Circe conducts herself and how things function down here in hell than when it comes to the Amazon culture itself back on Earth. And so it's really fascinating, right, to see how this works, because Steve is just kind of like, okay, will you give me a tour of this area? And so again, as we kind of follow this backstory here, there is a little bit of a chemistry between the two of them back and forth, right? For example, Steve Trevor is just totally swept up in Diana's eyes and how beautiful she looks. But then he's also kind of like, you're very tall, And again, because Diana hasn't really been socialized with people, she doesn't really understand the nuance when it comes to humans communicating with each other, right? Body language, different things like that, right? Kind of the subtle onset of flirtatious behavior, things along those lines. So where he's like, you're very tall, right? That's kind of inviting one of these conversations with, well, I mean, maybe it's a compliment, maybe it's not, more curiosity than anything else. And for her, it's just a statement of fact, right? We're of similar height. And he's like, yes, but I'm also very tall. And in my world, there are almost no women as tall as you are. And she's like, does this matter? And he's like, actually, no, it doesn't really matter at all. It's like, well, then let's talk of something else, right? So kind of small talk, right? And of course, if you're anything like me, small talk drives you crazy. It's an absolute waste of time. But small talk basically makes people comfortable with having more significant conversations with you. So you got to play that mundane game. And so once they're past the small talk and they start talking about things that actually matter, then it's just kind of like, okay, tell me about your world. And Steve Trevor doesn't really give her a whole lot of information here. One, because he's still kind of processing everything that's going on. But it is one of these things where it's kind of like, okay, he didn't expect to come here, right? That's literally what he says. Like, I mean, I don't want to brag, Diana, but I didn't think hell was where I was headed. And Diana makes this really interesting observation. She's like, I mean, does anybody ever actually expect to go to hell? Like, everybody thinks they're a good guy, even when they're a bad guy. So what it really shows here is that while Wonder Woman is isolated down here in the realm of hell, there's still a lot of wisdom when it comes to her understanding of people in general. Because truth to tell, you don't need to be like surrounded by people and spend your life with people in order to really understand people, right? That's the entire study of anthropology. You can learn the nature of human behavior through science. And in fact, you can really condense human behavior down to nothing more than a series of algorithms, right? And so what you end up doing is jumping back to this modern day right now, right, where they're in Gateway City. And that kind of picks up with the here and now, right, the events as they're transpiring. And so Steve Trevor takes Wonder Woman to his commanding officer, because again, with these harbingers seemingly having shown up out of nowhere, that the National Guard kind of military presence appeared here, basically to try to keep the city safe and so on and so forth, the normal response you would expect. And this is where Kelly Thompson nails Wonder Woman and really depicts her the exact same way that Greg Rucka did. Because as much as I love Kelly Thompson as a writer and as amazing as her Wonder Woman work is in DC Comics, Greg Rucka is the gold standard when it comes to writing Wonder Woman. I'm sorry, but that's just the way it is, right? That guy nails it every time he writes her character. And so there's this moment when she's talking to the commanding officer, and like he's just sort of pissed off, right? Because he sees her as kind of an anomaly, right? She shows up out of nowhere and she like basically takes over the entire situation and then deals with the Harbinger threat. And in a lot of ways, it makes him as a commanding officer feel kind of thrown under the bus to a degree, right? Like she basically went over his head, essentially, as far as the situation goes. And that's why she says, I understand your position, Commander. I am an outsider and an element that you cannot control, and that frustrates you. But this is not my problem, right? It's exactly what you would expect to hear from Wonder Woman, right? Your insecurities are your problem. Put on your big boy pants and deal with them. My problem is that monsters are coming, and I am only one woman, but I will coordinate with you to the best of my ability so that we may save more lives together. This world is not prepared for what is coming for it, and you will need my help. But please understand that any effort to fashion me into yet another arm of your military-industrial complex will simply not be tolerated. That's how Wonder Woman would conduct herself, right? And that's where he's like, you dare to speak to me that way? And she's like, yes. Moving on. And then she starts talking like, how's the evacuation doing, right? That is the authoritative Wonder Woman that needs to exist in comics. And James Gunn, make that the version of Wonder Woman in your DC cinematic universe. Not the Gal Gadot who's just designed to look pretty, right? Like make it an actual authoritative Wonder Woman who will do what needs to be done regardless of who likes it and who doesn't, right? Like that is the one that we need. And that's the one that we're getting here because she effectively takes over control of everything, right? Like literally seizes control of it all. And a lot of it's because she knows things that they don't. She knows what they're going to be dealing with, or at least to a degree, she knows a greater threat is coming. She doesn't know what it is, but she knows a greater threat is coming. And that's literally the question they ask, right? Like, okay, you dealt with the threat. These things are gone. Like, I mean, what else is there? She's like, no, 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 no. These are harbingers, right? Harbingers are messengers of a thing to come, right? So they were literally just carrier pigeons, effectively, for what it is that's coming here. They are not what you need to worry about. What you need to worry about is what sent them here. And that's where they're like, okay, so when will it be? Like, what will it be? And she's like, I don't know what it's going to be, but I know it'll probably be here within an hour. And you need to evacuate the entire city, right? It's kind of nuts. Now, of course, again, this commander starts yelling at her again and so on and so forth. And that's when she just like stops him dead in his tracks and is like, are you finished? Right? And he says, yes. And she's like, here's the problem, Commander. I think we both know you need me quite badly given what just happened. But I don't need you at all. So perhaps rethink how you would like to approach this conversation, and let's try again when you've calmed down. Hopefully, that will be before any more innocent people have lost their lives. I'll be outside feeding my horse. That's the important thing to understand here, guys. It's the old phrase, dance with the one who brung you, right? Like, do not screw over the hand that feeds you. And that's really what it is, right? Like, they need Wonder Woman more than she needs them. And so what happens if they piss her off to the point where she's like, you know what? I'm good. right? You do your thing. I'm going to head back home. Best of luck to you. Peace, right? And just leaves humanity to their fate. Now, again, a lot of what we don't know with regards to the absolute universe is whether or not absolute Superman and absolute Batman all share this same Earth and how far along they are on their respective journeys relative to Wonder Woman. It's what's happening in absolute Superman happening at the exact same time that this event is transpiring, or is absolute Superman already his guy? Has absolute Superman even presented himself to the world yet? There's a lot of things that we don't know as far as how the timelines line up. And I simply say that to say this could be a circumstance where if Wonder Woman just walked away, there is no absolute Batman yet, and there is no absolute Superman yet. So there's no one to save humanity. And so that's when, once she leaves and she goes out and does her own thing, that there's like this noise that happens when she's there with Steve Trevor. And she's like, oh my God, right? And there's this kind of, almost awestruck type fear that comes across her face as the entire city is nearly paralyzed by this sound. And she's just like, Mother, protect me in dangerous waters. Goddess, guide my hand, righteous and true. Sisters, if I do not find you in this world, I will find you in the next. For now, I have seen the face of the Tetracide, and none who see it shall survive. And they ask her, like, what is this? And she's like, death personified. And where initially they expected to evacuate the city within a mile range of the beach, she's like, you need to evacuate the entire city. And it's like, you have 40 minutes to do it. Now, here's the cool thing about this, right? Here's what makes this so dope, is because for a moment, while all this is going on at the Gateway Museum of Natural History, what you do is you pick up with Barbara Minerva, the woman who would historically become Cheetah. Now, we don't really know how her story is going to unfold, considering the fact that the whole of the absolute universe is a universe created by the god Darkseid. So we have no clue what her origin would look like, or if she would even become a hero or anything in that capacity. Instead, it kind of just tells us her character exists. And in fact, she's going to become pretty important to Wonder Woman as we get further along into this story, if only because of what she represents. Instead, you switch back to Wonder Woman herself, right? And they're just like, what did you do? And she's like, just some magic to slow it down and to buy us some time. The Tetracide is very resistant to magic. My mother would have been more effective, but at last, we only have me. And what she does is she basically starts to explain what this thing is. And I'll be honest with you guys, man, this Tetracide sounds horrifying, right? So she's like, before you leave, and you should all leave immediately, it's important I tell you how the Tetracide kills so that you could potentially find any hope of fighting it after it has killed me. And they're like, killed you? And she's like, I don't know how much more serious I can be about this situation. Please listen. Tetracide, it means quite literally the four killer. It kills in four ways: death of fear, death of mind, death of body, and death of soul. And that's where one of the guys is like, death of fear doesn't really sound so bad. And she's like, that's where you misunderstand. And that's why I'm glad I'm telling you this, because if you operated with that assumption, you guys would never have a chance in the first place. She says, the death of fear is our greatest danger, given that it is emerged in a heavily populated area. Because what the Tetracide means by death of fear is that you are no longer capable of feeling fear when you see it, and you are instead drawn to it, because it is a kind of evolutionary imperative that human beings experience fear and go into a fight or flight mode, right? 250,000 years ago, a million years ago, whatever, two cavemen were walking along a path and they both heard a rustling in the bushes, and the one who ran away lived longer than the one who went to go investigate, right? And ever since then, we've developed a kind of fight or flight response to things that we don't understand. And so it's a safety measure, right? Just kind of built into the human gene memory, I don't know, like whatever you want to call it, right? The evolution of humanity. But when that goes away, then suddenly you're susceptible to everything, right? And so she says, very soon after you lose your fear of death, that the Tetracide will begin to emanate a sound. It will be loud and sharp, and it will travel for miles. And when people hear that sound, they will be drawn to it like bees to honey. They will do anything to be with the sound. They will walk right into the Tetracide's jaws, where one by one, they will die in agony, a death of mind, of body, and soul. And the death of soul, I don't want to be dramatic, but the people who are crushed to death in the race to the Tetracide's maw will be the lucky ones. Because more often than not, right, like you die, and within the DC mythos, your soul travels to any one of a number of places depending on how you lived your life. But your essence continues on. For your soul to be consumed, you would spend eternity in agony, right? Like eternity being digested. And that's why she says, anyone who manages to survive the sound touching the tetracide will begin to destroy your mind, making you incapable of resisting death of body quickly follows as it ingests you. And death of soul, that pretty much explains itself. So please, for the love of Hera, leave this place and run if you can. And so initially, Wonder Woman goes to fight this thing, but understand, it's not her flying in blindly and attacking this creature. It's actually her testing it more than anything else to see what it is that she's capable of handling when it comes to what this creature can dish out. How powerful is it relative to her? So she uses her lasso, she uses her sword, and none of it overcomes this creature's power. And so what it seems to mean is that given her just very basic nature in and of itself, there's not enough that she can do to destroy this thing. Even when she like attacks his tentacles and things like that, one of them ends up sweeping up and grabbing her arm. And so what you do is that while that thing has her arm, you momentarily switch back to the Wild Isle. Now, this is a very, very important part of this story, because one of the things that happens is that, of course, Steve Trevor and Wonder Woman continuing to talk to each other, he very much misses being home. And who wouldn't, right? I mean, you wake up in this basically, barren wasteland that's effectively hell. Yeah, man, you're going to miss the hot dog stand on the corner. And so what ends up happening is that Wonder Woman actually finds a book of spells, and her knowing magic as she does, understands them. And so she basically asks, Steve Trevor to go outside and, take care of something for her. And then she presents the book to her mother. And it's like, hey, so I found a way to send Steve home, right? To get him back to his place because he's not supposed to be here. And that's when her mother's like, no, 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 no. You don't understand what you're messing with, right? This book asks for a sacrifice. This sacrifice that you are willing to make is not a small one. And she's like, I know that. I read the book. I'm willing to make it. She's like, then you don't understand the sacrifice that you're being asked to make. And the response of Wonder Woman is, I do. Right? Even so much that when her mother wakes up in the middle of the night and finds Diana just kind of sitting there, right? Like on the bed or on the floor rather, reading over this book, that it's just kind of like, damn, like she couldn't stop thinking about what needed to be done. Because from her stance, right, that Steve Trevor is more of a test than anything else. That if her mother tells her that she is truly destined to be a great warrior, right, that she is a great warrior now and will be a greater warrior still at some point along the line, then how can she fail her first test when some mystery man just washes up on the shores of their island? She has the means to send him home, even if it requires a sacrifice of herself, and she won't make it, right? It's like failing the first real test. How far are you willing to go to protect others, right? Are you a person who says, well, I'm willing to do what needs to be done. I'm willing to do what needs to be done in order to make things better, so long as it doesn't really require anything of me, it's like, so long as it doesn't really take much effort, right? Or are you willing to put it all on the line, right? Are you willing to risk everything in order to become the person that you truly think you are meant to be? Which one are you? And Wonder Woman is going with the latter of these, so much so that the spell requires the arm of a great warrior, and she had already cut hers off and just like laid it bare in front of her mom. And Cersei's just like, what have you done? And she's like, what was necessary? And so ultimately the spell is cast by Diana and her mother, and Steve Trevor is sent home. And that's where Cersei just kind of has this bit of a conversation, I guess maybe like a monologue. I think it's Cersei, maybe it's Steve, but like it says, I had known for a very long time that she was exceptional, but even still, I had underestimated her capacity for love, her capacity for pain, her capacity for sacrifice, her capacity for honor. This child would change the world. I had foreseen it in my scrying pool. Okay, so obviously this is Cersei. And she says, but now I was seeing it live in front of me, living and breathing. It was more powerful than I could have ever imagined. And so what you do is you switch back to Wonder Woman in the here and now. And with the, Tetracide having her arm, she basically casts a spell and her arm disappears. Then she ends up traveling back and goes to all the other soldiers. And that's where she reveals to them that like her arm has been gone the entire time. What they saw as her arm was a magical spell that her and her mother cast in order to give her a new arm. And she can do it again, but the spell's exceedingly complicated. The easier thing for her to do is to basically take a kind of machine arm and just attach it to herself, right? So Wonder Woman's walking around all half machine, which I gotta be honest with you guys, man, looks pretty dope, man. She's giving off like, Winter Soldier vibes over here, and I'm here for it, man. But ultimately, right, she's just kind of like, okay, here's the thing. She says, the rest of you who are all here, the sound is already beginning. I could feel the rumbling on the beach. You must move now, or the next time I see you, you will be climbing over each other so that you might be devoured. For the love of Hecate, move faster. And initially, Steve's just like, no, right? I don't want to do that. Like, I do not want to leave you here alone. And that's why Diana's like, I can appreciate that, right? Like, you recognize the sacrifice I made to save your life. You're willing to make a sacrifice to save mine, but understand here, there's no honor in the sacrifice that you would be making. You would literally just be sitting around here being attacked, right? And ultimately being duped into walking into the maw of some gigantic beast that would kill everybody in this city. There's nothing you can do to protect me because this is beyond you, right? And so ultimately, Steve kind of works alongside the other guys to start evacuating the entire city. Wonder Woman starts making her way out of the bar, and that's when she runs into Barbara Minerva. And that's where Barbara refers to her as Wonder Woman. The reason why is because it's what the Amazons would call the greatest among them, the Wonder Woman, and that she believes that Wonder Woman is an Amazon. Of course, she is, born to the Amazons, brought to hell as a newborn baby, and raised by Circe. So in effect, Barbara represents a vast well of knowledge about the culture that Wonder Woman comes from that Wonder Woman knows nothing about. And so she's very, very curious about getting to know Barbara better, because potentially, while a lot of the Amazon mythology is exactly that on Earth, it's a myth, right? So not all of humanity believes it, and they know even less about whether it's actually true. That Wonder Woman could kind of begin this search for her own heritage and her own people based on the knowledge of Barbara. So this is kind of a way for Kelly Thompson to sort of lay the groundwork for the significance of Barbara's character, likely a team up between the two, ultimately leading to Barbara becoming Cheetah, most likely. But in the here and now, the sound begins from the Tetracide, and that's where Wonder Woman ends up going on the attack. But as she does, right, she has this just like really amazing statement where she says, this is futile. I will break upon the Tetracide and die, leaving no one left to fight for these people. And once the sound begins, they will literally crush one another in their rush to embrace horrific ends at any cost. But I see no other path. It must be the sword, the lasso, something solid, as my magic alone is no match for the Tetracide with its hide so thick. And then she starts thinking, and she's like, unless, and this is one of the things that I love about Absolute Wonder Woman, right? It's not to say that Wonder Woman in the main DC universe is, some kind of a dummy. She's very smart, she's very capable, but Absolute Wonder Woman really just always seems to be thinking out of the box, right? Thinking outside the box and invoking magic far more often than her counterpart in the main DC universe. And so what Diana does is she goes and she tracks down like these news anchors who are on the beach and like they're just broadcasting the whole thing, right? And it's like she grabs them and she's like, I need your assistance, right? And so she kind of creates this sort of magical, device around her, right? This inscription, pentagram, whatever you want to call it, and starts to cast a spell. And what she does is she starts talking directly to everybody who's watching the news feed. This is brilliant by Wonder Woman, right? It's a brilliant maneuver. She says, hello, Gateway City. My name is Diana, and I'm afraid I need your help to save your city. There is a terrible monster on your beach called the Tetracide, and I've been trying to fight it, but it is very powerful. It is beyond me. The military is trying to evacuate you, but there is simply not enough time. Soon the Tetracide will begin to emit a sound that will compel you to sacrifice yourselves to it. This will be difficult to hear, to understand, but to save you from this fate, I am going to briefly make all of you deaf, the entire city. And it's like such a smart thing to do. If the sound is what draws them, take away their ability to hear. And she says, many of you do not believe me, but I assure you, you're about to become believers. Panic and the chaos that brings will now be almost as deadly as the Tetracide itself. And so I need you to be calm. I need you, especially those of you that are hearing this message now, to help your friends and neighbors. Kindness and compassion are all that will save us now. I came here to save your city, but today it seems that it will be up to each of you to save your city instead. I know I can do it. Wonder Woman believes in you. And so she casts this spell across the entire city, seemingly making them all deaf. And then it'll just come down to her and the Tetracide, which we'll find out in the next video. With that being said, guys, we're going to bring this to an end. I told you guys, man, Absolute Wonder Woman is, actually, you guys told me that Absolute Wonder Woman is incredible, and it is. If you guys enjoyed this video, hopefully you did. If you did, make sure you drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace.